Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Murders That Made Us: How Vigilantes, Hoodlums, Mob Bosses, Serial Killers, and Cult Leaders Built the San Francisco Bay Area, by Bob Calhoun. Narrated by Sellon-Wright. If one must be murdered, it'd be far more satisfactory from many standpoints to be murdered in San Francisco. Russell Krauss, New York Times, August 3, 1947. Introduction. A short history of the ongoing end of San Francisco. San Francisco is over. You missed it. This ain't the summer of love. Punk is dead. Die yuppie scum, die techie scum, fucking hipsters. But San Francisco has always been over. It ended about 20 years before you got here, no matter when that was. If you grew up here, it ended some time before you turned 21, and you had to hear your older sister tell you how you're just tromping through the ruins of the real San Francisco that she was lucky enough to be around for. My mother used to go to El Patio, this jazz club over on Market and South Van Ness in the 1950s. She danced to Perez Prado and the Dorsey Brothers when they blew through town. Bill Graham took it over in 1968 and turned it into the Fillmore West. Grateful Dead and Santana played there, and Allen Ginsberg read poetry from its stage. The hippies took it over and ruined everything, my mother said, lamenting the downfall of El Patio and the San Francisco she knew. She and my dad hightailed it out of the city and moved to Redwood City. There weren't any hoppin' jazz clubs in the burbs, but they did get a swimming pool out of the deal. You had those kinds of options when you were fleeing the city because the rent was too damned low instead of the other way around. But to the baby boomers, the summer of love, with all the brown acid you could OD on and venereal crabs you could catch, was what made San Francisco what it was. And if you missed that, you missed San Francisco. The city was over. Dan White and Jim Jones stuck a fork in it in 1978. It was done. My parents escaped the hippie ruination in the 60s. I returned to the city looking for that sort of thing. I saw dead Kennedys at the farm in the 80s, and I wrestled Macho Sasquatcho in a concrete nightclub in Soma in the 1990s. Not so humble brags, I know. But I still feel like I missed the better, crazier, wilder San Francisco that had been, that I was way too late. This isn't to say that other cities don't inspire the same kind of nostalgia that San Francisco does. Vanishing New York will match every defunct diner and shuttered dive bar that Vanishing SF can throw at you. Chicago also mourns its closed-down watering holes, along with a heartbreaking number of public schools. But San Francisco seems to hold this idea that a more real version of itself existed some time before you got there, poured into its very concrete and seeping out of the wood of its old Victorians. The city that was is the city that is, inseparable but kept apart by the chasm of time. In Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, 1958, when Tom Elmore as smarmy shipping magnate Gavin Elster, yes, his name is Gavin, hires Scotty Ferguson, Jimmy Stewart, to tail his wife Madeline, Kim Novak, he tells Ferguson, "The things that spell San Francisco to me are disappearing fast. The mid-20th century San Francisco that Elster bemoans is the city that my mother longed to return to, 10 years before Ken Kesey, Jerry Garcia, and Grace Slick showed up and wrecked the damned El Patio. The city that was is also made seemingly more authentic by its crimes, or Who Shot Who in the Embarcadero, August 1879, as Ferguson's long-suffering gal pal Midge, Barbara Bel Geddes, puts it. And the San Francisco that was, with its criminal past giving it gravitas, becomes a malevolent force in Vertigo, possessing and obsessing Madeline and Ferguson until the film's climax in a centuries-old Mission Adobe. One final thing I have to do, and then I'll be free of the past. Ferguson says as he drives Madeline through redwood trees that have lived on this earth for thousands of years. I have to go back into the past once more, just once more, for the last time. The sad thing for him is that he can't. None of us can. 22 years earlier, the opening title card of MGM's San Francisco, 1936, informed us that San Francisco dreams of the queen city she was, splendid and sensuous, vulgar and magnificent. That city was completely leveled by the 1906 earthquake and the pillars of flame that followed it. In the film, buildings shake apart via special effects that complete a Sodom and Gomorrah narrative. The city we live in today is the one that Clark Gable, Jeanette MacDonald, and Spencer Tracy pledged to rebuild as they marched towards the camera, singing Battle Hymn of the Republic. The final shot of the film shows the smoldering ruins of San Francisco fading into the 1930s-era financial district, a shot Scorsese pays homage to at the end of Gangs of New York, 2002. The total destruction caused by the quake goes a long way towards explaining why San Francisco is a city preoccupied with its own demise, but these musings over vanishing San Francisco predate 1906. Bret Harte, one of early California's great scribes, along with Mark Twain and Ambrose Bierce, tells us you pretty much had to come over on a tall ship with Richard Henry Dana to see the real San Francisco. In Bohemian Days in San Francisco, published in the Saturday Evening Post in 1900, Harte recalls a city of houses with floors made from wooden tobacco crates and roofs that were nothing more than cloth tarps. If you thought, as I did, that things were rough in front of Taqueria Cancun on 18th and Mission in the 1990s, that scene had nothing on the weird stories of disappearing men found afterward embedded in the ooze in which they had fallen and gasped their life away, or that one Sunday when a Chinaman was stoned to death by a crowd of children returning from Sunday school. If you weren't there for that, you're just a goddamn poser. In The Mission Dolores, published in 1863, Harte waxes like the San Francisco Chronicle's A Changing Mission series from 2014, only with more racism. The Mission Dolores is destined to be the last sigh of the native Californian, Harte writes. When the last greaser shall indolently give way to the bustling Yankee, I can imagine he will, like the Moorish king, ascend to one of the Mission Hills to take his last lingering look at the hilled city. I miss those black-haired women with swaying, unstable busts, Harte writes, speculating on a future San Francisco bereft of Latinas. Guess what, Brett? They're still here, and unfortunately still being pushed out by today's version of bustling Yankees with blockchains filled with crypto. Change itself never seems to change. In August 2015, Jeremy Liebarger, editor of the SF Weekly, invited me to contribute a true crime column for the paper's website. After several weeks of presenting the Bay Area's murders and scandals of the past, I started to see a narrative of the metropolitan region itself through the crimes that were committed here. As I arranged my criminal history of the Bay Area into a loose chronology, I found that I wasn't just telling stories of the prominent citizens who met bad ends, but also about the people you've never heard of, as Jimmy Stewart's Scotty Ferguson says in Vertigo. The assassinations of Chronicle publisher Charles DeYoung, Mayor George Moscone, and Supervisor Harvey Milk are here, side by side with Spanny Lopez, the carnation grower who was hacked up and left behind a Market Street movie theater. The kidnapping of newspaper heiress Patty Hearst or the attempts to assassinate President Ford are only pages from the stories of Leroy Carter, Jr., 9-year-old Michael Nguyen, and all the other people you've never heard of who got killed and dumped in Golden Gate Park. There are so many of those that they get their own chapter. There isn't a corner of this city that hasn't been touched by crime. San Francisco was founded by genocidal missionaries and modernized by vigilantes who hung people from the roof of a brick building on Sacramento and California streets. Many of our mayors have been hucksters, and our cops are often corrupt. What Midge, again with the vertigo, calls the juicy stories are intertwined with the histories of art movements, lost neighborhoods, suburban migrations, the struggle for LGBTQ+ rights, the summer of love, and political fortunes. Joan Didion, who's made a pretty good career out of explaining California to New Yorkers, wrote that all narrative was sentimental in her essay, The White Album, a meditation on the 1960s that springs from buying a dress for Manson family member Linda Kasabian. Didion connects the dots between buying a white dress on the morning that JFK was shot to Roman Polanski spilling red wine on it 4 years later. Polanski marries Sharon Tate, who was stabbed to death during the Manson family's murderous raid on her home on August 9, 1969. On July 27, 1970, Didion buys another dress for Kasabian to wear during her testimony on the murders at Sharon Tate Polanski's house on Cielo Drive in Benedict Canyon. Didion also warns, all connections were equally meaningful and equally senseless. I blow past this admonition here, but can't quite ignore it. As I formed a cohesive narrative from what Didion would call the shifting phantasmagoria of San Francisco's criminal past, I hit upon the awful truth that crime held as much nostalgia for me as the dive bars being torn down for luxury condos. So here is my true crime history of San Francisco, equal parts revulsion and sentiment, where the city we long to return to has far too many skeletons in its closet. It begins not with shootings on the Embarcadero in 1879, but with a brutal murder on San Bruno Mountain overlooking the bay in 1959. A murder my own mother was once suspected of. Chapter 1. My Mother the Murder Suspect. My mother, Jackie Calhoun, only talked about the murder sparingly. Her hushed tones when she did stood in sharp contrast to how she spoke of everything else. Tales of a fight at the laundromat over the dryers, or that time the doctor threw a pen at her hypochondriac friend, were retold often and in excruciating detail. My mother loved to gossip, and though the murder was her juiciest story by far, it was different. It was serious. The details of the murder that she told me were muddled in my memory by the names of friends and acquaintances she knew before I was born. From what I remember, a friend of the family's was shot in his truck by some crazy woman he picked up somewhere. He called her either a stupid fool or a stupid bitch, depending on the telling. That my mom could know this little detail didn't make sense because the murder took place in the suburban woods somewhere on the Bay Area Peninsula. But there was one other detail of the murder that really stuck in my mind. My mom spoke of growing suspicion among her clique of suburbanites as the murder investigation dragged on unsolved for months. You started to suspect everybody, friends, neighbors, she said. You didn't know who to trust. You wondered who could have done it. I always meant to write an article or even a novel out of all that backyard paranoia, but I never thought of asking my mom to retell the story of the murder until it was too late. She passed away in October 2009 after cancer had shrunk her down to almost nothing. My last conversations with her were about the hallucinations brought on by her steady supply of painkillers, or my pleading with her to drink her damned Ensure. I've never tasted Ensure, but it must be horrible. Elderly people would rather die than drink it. During those final days, I never asked my mom about the murder, or about anything else for that matter. I didn't get the story of how she moved to San Francisco from Oklahoma in the 1940s, divorced my dad in the 70s, or that time in the 50s when she went to the Black Cat, a seminal gay bar with my dad and uncle, and all the men hit on them and ignored her. I know these stories well enough to tell you about them, but I only have recollections of her recollections, usually delivered from her favorite chair as she lit a smoke. Details are scant and murky. My dad, Leo Calhoun, is in good health, but he's pushing 80. I asked him about the murder while we were having lunch at a Peruvian restaurant in Redwood City, a once working-class Bay Area suburb that's being gobbled up by Silicon Valley. "Do you remember the murder that my mom used to talk about?" I asked. "I think it happened back when you both lived in the Redwood City hills, or maybe it was South San Francisco. I got the impression it happened out in the woods somewhere, but not too far out there." "August Norrie," he answered, letting the victim's name hang in the air for a while before elaborating. "The murder happened when my mom and dad lived on Guttenberg Street in Crocker, Amazon, not far from where I live today. My dad pronounces it Guttenberg, like a punch in the gut, instead of Gutenberg, like the Bible. August Norrie was dumping some lawn clippings on Mount San Bruno, a hillside covered with eucalyptus trees on the southern edge of San Francisco. Norrie ran into a young woman with a gun. She asked him if he was up for a little target practice. He said yes, not realizing he was the target. She shot him several times for no reason at all. My dad gave me the names and places that I didn't have before, but then he dropped a bomb. "You know, your mother was questioned in the murder investigation," he said. "She matched the suspect's description. A blonde was seen leaving the scene of the murder in Norrie's car. Your mother was blonde, and we lived next door to the Norries back then. They were looking for someone who was having an affair with him," he added. This was a shock, to say the least. My mother never mentioned being braced by homicide dicks. I'd remember that. Anyone would remember that. I pressed my dad for more details. He didn't really have any. He came home from work one day, and my mom said that she'd been questioned for about an hour or so. Now, when we went to Augie's Memorial on Mission Street, you could see binoculars or camera lenses being poked through the blinds of the office across the street from the funeral home, my dad recalled. They were watching everyone. Details were now less scant, but maybe even murkier. I put my skills as a researcher and journalist to piecing together the story of the murder the way I should have when my mom was still alive. I dug through online newspaper archives, yellowing clipping files kept by local historical societies, and aging spools of microfilm in the hopes that I'd be able to figure out why my mom chose to soft-pedal this story. August Norrie had an Aeroflin mustache and a mess of dark, slicked-back hair in the one headshot I could find of him that kept cropping up on lurid crime websites. He was a former Arthur Murray dance instructor and a one-time minor league pitching prospect. He had all kinds of trick pitches, my dad recalled during a later phone conversation, but he couldn't get the major league hitters out with his fastball. After failing in a tryout with the San Francisco Seals, Norrie became a self-employed gardener, mowing lawns at the Lake Merced Golf Club not far from his home in Daly City, which he shared with his new bride, Darlene. On Monday, February 2nd, 1959, Norrie made the papers in the worst possible way when his bullet-torn, blood-spattered automobile was found abandoned on a lonely lover's lane, according to the San Mateo Times. The car was ditched on the 300 block of Peoria Street in Daly City, 8 blocks from my parents' house. The next day, the San Mateo Times headline blared, "Police hunt blonde in multiple-shot murder," with the kind of overwhelming typeface usually reserved for things like the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Crowding the paper's masthead into a corner was a gruesome photo of Norrie's corpse lying in a patch of weeds on the downward slope of Mount San Bruno. A bullet wound is clearly visible in Norrie's cheek, even with the low-resolution reproduction. In the lower right-hand corner, way below the fold, a much smaller headline reads, "Trio of rock and roll fame die in crash." August Norrie almost pushed the deaths of Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper, the day the music died, to page 5. Norrie was shot 18 times with a .38 Special, a 6-shooter. That means the killer emptied the revolver once, reloaded, kept shooting, and reloaded again. On the day of the shooting, a good-looking blonde, driving a car that looked like Norrie's, almost ran over a 12-year-old kid playing on the hillside. "We have information that there was another woman involved in Norrie's life," San Mateo County Sheriff L. Whitmore told reporters. Whitmore added that the blonde woman might be married, and there was the remote possibility that Norrie was slain by an avenging husband. While the eyewitness description led the police to my mother, they were also figuring my dad for the crime. Norrie was murdered on Sunday and found on Monday. On Tuesday, Sheriff Whitmore and Daly City Police questioned Darlene Norrie for several hours. August was 28. Darlene was 20. They had been married for only 18 months. The couple was expecting their first child. Police inspectors found a paperback on child-rearing titled "The First Year of Life" in the back seat of Norrie's blood-soaked sedan. The whole thing was incredibly sad. Sheriff's Inspectors Eugene Stewart and William Ridenour continued the search for the blonde revenge slayer. On Wednesday, February 4th, 1959, they questioned a 19-year-old blonde waitress who was found drunk in a Daly City residence that wasn't her own. They cleared the drunken waitress and then questioned more blondes. One of those blondes was Jacqueline Faye Calhoun, age 24. 10 years later, she'd be my mother. Did my mom offer Stewart and Ridenour coffee when they came knocking on her door? Was she cordial or hostile? Either way, she must have been scared, probably more scared than she'd ever been in her life, before or since, except maybe when she was diagnosed with cancer. My older sister Danielle was just 7 months old at the time. Had my mom put her down for a nap, or did she cry through the entire interview, providing my mom with a living, screaming alibi? Either way, my sister's existence probably helped cross my mom off the suspect list. The wood-shingled house on Guttenberg Street where my mother was interrogated straddles the border between the Daly City suburbs and San Francisco's Crocker Amazon neighborhood. My grandmother lived there with my mom while my dad was away in the Air Force. When my dad got back from fixing radios in South Korea in 1957, my grandmother moved to downtown San Francisco to party down at El Patio. You go, Grandma. My grandmother on my father's side lived just up the block in a house that now has in front of it a broken-down truck so old that it looks like she left it there. Growing up with divorce and custody battles, I find it hard to imagine both sides of my family ever being so close. A block away, Guttenberg dead ends at the incline of the mountain where Norrie became a human target. Up the street from my parents lived Charles and Rose Norrie, August's parents. Charles Norrie was a hard-looking man with an uneven bowl haircut. He was a union beer bottler and coach of the minor league baseball team that August pitched for. My dad was a bat boy with the team in the 1940s and even traveled with the team for a game at San Quentin. My mother's younger brother, Dan Williams, briefly dated the woman who later married Bob Norrie, August's younger brother. The histories of my family and the Norries were once intertwined. The murder investigation dragged on for 6 weeks. My mom always made it sound like 6 months because it probably felt that way. The killer was finally announced with more banner headlines on April 16, 1959. Her name was Rosemarie Diane Bjorklund. Her friends called her Penny. Blonde and 18, she lived in her parents' house on Oliver Street in Daly City, 4 blocks parallel to the houses on Guttenberg Street. The inspectors probably passed by her block on their way to grill my mother. The sheriffs tracked her down through the cheap homemade bullets she used, called wad cutters. She bought them from an auto mechanic out in Colma, the Bay Area's suburban necropolis. The mechanic tried to tell the cops that a box of bullets had been stolen out of his car. The cops leaned on him. His story fell apart. He gave up Penny. She was arrested on April 14th, a Tuesday. Sheriff Whitmore sweet-talked a confession out of her at a quiet family restaurant in San Carlos called the Doll House. Penny had the meatloaf with strawberry shortcake for dessert. "For about a year or a year and a half, I've had the urge to kill someone," she said. I wanted to see if I could commit a murder and not have it on my conscience. She could. "I've felt better ever since I killed him," she confessed. "It's like a burden has been lifted off of me." The papers dubbed her with names worthy of a pulp fiction villain. She was the Urge Killer or the Blonde Murderess. The story was strange enough to get picked up by papers as far away as Moberly, Missouri, and Pottstown, Pennsylvania. The San Francisco Chronicle devoted nearly a full-page spread to a celebrity-style profile of Bjorklund with glamour shots flanked by lingerie ads. The Times-Tribune out of Palo Alto called her plump and pretty. Sometime after her confession, law enforcement officials drove Bjorklund to the same hillside where she obliterated Norrie so she could reenact the crime. Inspector Stewart filmed Bjorklund as she pretended to shoot an imaginary version of Norrie. According to several newspaper accounts, Bjorklund told sheriffs that Norrie called her a stupid fool after she pumped the first shot into his gut, although the Examiner quoted her as saying stupid ... lending validity to both of my mom's versions of events. Bjorklund hadn't arranged to meet with Norrie on the day of the murder, but they did know each other. About a month before the murder, Penny found Norrie dumping lawn clippings on the hill where she later killed him. He took her to a drive-through burger joint before returning her home. She gave him her phone number. He never called her. Norrie didn't try anything with Penny either time he met her, but he was playing it real close to the line. After months of generating headlines while awaiting trial, Penny Bjorklund was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison on August 6, 1959. This was a willful, wanton killing, Superior Court Judge Frank B. Bloom declared. Bjorklund served just 7 years of her sentence before being released and fading into obscurity. At 25 years old, she was still young. She might have gone on to marry, have kids. A public figure page on Facebook, that likely isn't maintained by her, has 69 likes, with people leaving comments on how they'd love to meet her. About a week after my mother died, I was going through voicemails. There was one from her asking when I was coming to see her. She sounded so weak. I had to crank the volume just to make out what she was saying. I hit the delete key without thinking, only to feel a wave of guilt seconds later. That was the last time I would hear my mother's voice, and I erased her just to make space on a hard drive. The newspapers told me the story of August Norrie and Penny Bjorklund bathed in hyperbole, but they didn't tell me the story that I was really after. The story of my mother during that police questioning in 1959 and the weeks of suspicion afterwards. I attempted to find that story in court records and police reports, but they had all been purged. Details of death sentences and lives ruined had been tossed in a dumpster somewhere just to make space. Crime isn't usually something we get sentimental over. My dad and my uncle are some of the only people left who remember the murder. I've gotten their stories and unearthed little pieces of family history that I never asked of my mother. I took notes and asked questions this time. I thought the mid-20th century would always be with us, just in the rearview mirror. But it's not anymore. It's getting to be so long ago. Chapter 2. Vigilance. The Hounds. Flakes of gold were found by a New Jersey carpenter in the American River near Sutter's Mill in the Sacramento Valley on January 24, 1848. John Sutter, the Swiss immigrant who owned the mill where he enslaved several Hawaiians, wanted to keep the discovery quiet, but word got out. By 1849, San Francisco's then natural harbor was clogged with ships filled with gold hunters from the eastern United States, Australia, China, Chile, and Peru. The 49ers, as they came to be called, ditched their ships in the bay and hightailed it inland in hopes of striking it rich. Many of the ships were sunk near the shore, covered in sludge, and used to form the highly unstable landfill that the 58-story Millennium Tower is sinking into today. even with people streaming from the 10th.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?